Like I do every year, I have gone and asked you guys to tell me what is your most anticipated release of the first half of 2026. I've gotten a lot of responses, so if the book made the list, it just means that it had a significant amount of you anticipating it. This list might look a little bit different than others because it is not an exhaustive list of all the books that are being released in 2026. It is not sorted by any particular genre. It is also not necessarily including all of the most hype book releases that there are. It's very much catered for this audience. Chances are that if you're watching this video, other people who watch this channel and have answered in this form that I have sent out may have a similar reading taste like yourself. So it makes sense that you guys share your anticipated reads with each other because there's a logical overlap. So with that, I'm hoping that this list is going to be useful. I hope you're comfortable. I hope that you have your devices at a ready to take screenshots or have yourself a little notebook at hand. A couple quick things. With the books that are not yet released, especially towards the second half of the first half of the half of the year, dates sometimes change. There are also UK release dates, and if you're watching from a different country, your date may differ slightly. And the categories that the books I have noted under are also very much of what other people shelve them as. So it's not a scientific method. Last point before we dive in is the heart system. But the ones with the hearts next to them are just a little bit extra. So 1 heart if a significantly higher number of people have mentioned it, 2, even more people mentioning it, and a rare 3 heart badge, I guess, is for creme de la creme, the most anticipated books as judged by you. So we have 79 books to go through, so I am obviously not going to speak about them in depth. I'm going through this with an expectation that if you're watching this video, you are likely already part of the community and already familiar with the scope of what we're talking about. All right, let's start with January, like the years tend to. So some of these are already out. The sequel to Language of Dragons. This is a young adult dark academia with, you guessed it, dragons. It's called The War of Wyverns. And if you were a fan of the Gilded Wolves series, the author has just come out with a new YA retelling called The Swan's Daughter. Contemporary romance with a dash of mystery about a crime podcast where the main character tries to solve a serial killer case. Is out on the 13th, and it's called A Killer Kind of a Romance. Also on the 13th, another dark academia, but this time a romantasy. And if I'm not mistaken, this has a magic system based on the tarot cards, which I know some of you are also very into. A Little Women reimagined as a young adult thriller genuinely made me also be interested in this. It's called Beth is Dead, is out on the 15th of January, as well as one of the very few graphic novels that made it onto the list for you. It's called Les Normaux. I am absolutely sure that is not how you pronounce it, but you get me. And it's a fantasy graphic novel in a dark gothic romance called Fruit of the Flesh. Because it was categorized as dark romance, do just check some content warnings if you're interested, and it comes out on the 20th. Still in January, we have the first Kingfisher, which is not the last Kingfisher on the list. Some authors are mighty busy. This is a humorous, I assume, young adult fantasy called 9 Goblins. Very excited about this. Also on the same day, The Poet Empress by Shen Tao, which is a historical adult fantasy. Still on the 20th, and I don't know if you will even guess the number in the series, but it is 18 in the Dresden Files series. I wasn't aware that this is actually still ongoing, first of all. But it is a very popular series, so I'm not too surprised to see it on the list. The very first one, With the Heart. It's a book by the author who wrote I'm Glad My Mom Died, which is also a very scandalized kind of title. And for this one, we clearly have a very scandalized cover, so shock value is definitely a strategy there. And that being said, I did actually really enjoy the other books, so I am intrigued about this one. This one is actually a contemporary literary drama, rather than the other one was biographical, so I don't know necessarily if this one is. This may actually just be fictional. Comes out on the 20th and obviously was mentioned quite a lot. Still in January, on the 22nd, if you enjoyed In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, this author has a new one coming out on the 22nd. However, this one, interestingly, is not a thriller that I could see. It's more of a contemporary literary type of situation with some romance. Want to say the last at least 3 releases were heavily thrillers, so Gonna be very interesting to see about that. On the 27th, we also have another thriller mystery called My Husband's Wife. And then the 29th, a new start of the series by the same name as the first book, Queen of Faces, which is a young adult dark academia book. Also on the 29th, we have a gothic horror fantasy called On Sunday She Picked Flowers. And we're on to February, the second month. Not so bad, right? On the 3rd of February, we have a quirky title, Apparently Still Camera Needs to Die. And this is a cozy fantasy about a sorcerer who is forced to protect a cowardly knight after a prophecy ties their fates together. And another cozy fantasy romance is the third book in the Baby Dragon series. This one's called The Baby Dragon Bookshelf and is out on the 10th. Another one that's out on the 10th and had a lot of mentions from yourselves is the third series in the Prince of Sin series. I also sometimes mention the first book in the series because I personally find it easier to remember them by that. The first book is called Throne of the Fallen. This one's Throne of Nightmares, and it is a paranormal fantasy. A book that is being republished actually under a different name than before is one by Kristen Cicerelli, who is the author of The Crimson Wand. This is a young adult paranormal fantasy, and it is being published now under a dark forgetting, previously known as Edgewood. Also on the 12th is a brand new series starred by Matt Dinniman, who is the author of Dungeon Crawler Carl. Very similar vibes to that one, but just obviously a different story, but it's still humorous. It's still a sci-fi fantasy mixture with a dystopia. Logan is a huge fan of Dungeon Crawler Carl, and he has also read this already and also really thoroughly enjoyed it, so bodes well. And book 11 in Wayward Children series, which I think is insane as well, which is a fantasy series, and I couldn't quite tell properly if it's a young adult or an adult, so if anyone knows, let us know in the comments as well. Still in February. Now for your absolutely most anticipated read of this half of the year, and by such a long shot that it wasn't even a competition, it's Agnes Aubert's Mystical Cat Shelter. This is a story about a woman who runs a cat shelter and then has to work with a grumpy wizard, to help save it. So I'm absolutely also not surprised to see it here, let alone the fact that this is the author of Emily Wilde books. A perfect combination. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I myself had this on my radar, so I'm very excited to experience this alongside of you. And followed also by a very highly anticipated book. It is And Now Back to You, which is the second book in the Heartstring series. The first one was called First Time Caller. That is a funny sentence there. I actually quite like the pitch for that, which pretty much is two meteorologists are competing in the opposites attract romance. Another one that I might actually be reading this and I have never heard of, and if not for this list I wouldn't have, which I'm very happy that I now know, is the Star Seekers. It kind of reminded me of For All Mankind TV show, which I love, but like with fantasy, which is even better than. It's that arcane engineer at NASA and its space race. So it's like a historical fantasy, but with sci-fi. Sounds a little bit also, kind of alternate universe situation. Love that. Also on the 26th, and anticipated by yourself, is a book aptly named Cleopatra because it is about Cleopatra telling her own story. The 26th as well, and The Astral Library by Kate Quinn, which is another historical fantasy. There's actually a lot of historical stuff happening, I feel, in these slides this time around. And we're off to March. 3rd of March, we have a contemporary romance set in a small town. It's called Across Vanishing Sky, and it is the first in the Starlight Grove series, I believe. And another contemporary romance called How to Write a Love Story on the 10th. On the 17th, we have an adult book written by Ava Reid. I'm not actually sure if this is the first adult book by Ava Reid, but it is also dark academia, which is fitting with her previous stuff as well. On the 24th, we have a short sci-fi stories book called Seasons of Glass and Iron, and you may recognize the name from the author of This Is How You Lose the Time War. I don't remember if this is two authors or one author. If you enjoyed that, you may want to have this on your radar too. And another one that was extremely often mentioned was the new book by Abby Jimenez. This is the second one, Say You'll Remember Me. But I think is similarly how most of the contemporary romance books go. You can kind of read them separately either way. And this one's called The Night We Met. And then lastly, No, not Leslie, I lie. On the 26th, fourth book in the Children of Time series, which is a sci-fi space opera. I read half of the first one and I really, really loved it. I did not DNF it like on purpose. It just so happened. I do want to come back to it. Second Kingfisher book. This one is more in line with their gothic horror series, and this is a fantasy, and it's called Wolfworm. From what I've read, it sounds a bit more like body horror. And the third book in Into Darkness series, the first book is called Lights Out. The title of the new one is Game Mon, and this is a dark romance. We also have The Geomagician, which is a historical fantasy romance. I'm telling you, there's a lot of historical stuff here. And on the same day, The Steel Gods, epic fantasy. On to April. We have another beloved one, which is This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me, an urban fantasy with romance. The Shatter Me fans are going to be excited because the second book in the New Republic section of the Shatter Me saga is out. It must be at this point like one of the longest run kind of young adult series, right? Not quite sure. One that really intrigued me is called The Escape Game. This is co-written between Marissa Meyer and Tamara Moss. It's a young adult mystery thriller. It's escape room themed game show, and nothing about that doesn't appeal to me. So I might be reading that as well. There's also a new book by Patrick Ness, who is the author of Monster Calls. I feel like I've not seen his stuff come up recently. New series and a new sci-fi dystopia for young adults, and it's called Piper at the Gates of Dusk, so that's quite exciting. And by far, my favorite cover of the entire slides is for this book called The Subtle Art of Folding Space, which is a sci-fi book. It's pitched as having unhinged physics, generational trauma, and a lot of food love, and again, was not aware of before and extremely happy to be aware of now. Another one on the 7th, and of course this one got a lot of hype in the responses, and surprisingly so. They had a lot of good marketing going on already. They created this mystery about who are these authors, because this book was co-written and they were heavily hinting on one of the authors being very well known, and it was a lot of kind of like PR for it. The author that was well known turned out to be V. Schwab, and it's also a little bit different to their usual writing. It's a thriller mystery. I'm excited to see what people will think. On the 9th, also with a very significant amount of hype from the author of The Spell Shop, we have a new YA cozy fantasy called The Faraway Inn. Surprisingly, somewhat for me, because I feel like I've not seen anything from this author in a while, is Rainbow Rowell, with a contemporary romance, but for adults this time. On the 16th as well, we have another crime thriller, and it's called Everyone in This Bank is a Thief, and this is a fourth book in the Ernest Cunningham series. It says 10 suspects and 10 heists. We also have a horror mystery thriller called The Caretaker coming out on the 21st. Fourth volume of the graphic novel called Lightfall. Was so happy to see that name here because what a cute name. You all know I love that word. What a coincidence. But also the only middle grade to make the list. So kudos to it for that on the 23rd. Similarly on the 23rd, The Antiquarians, Object of Desire, which is a historical romance fantasy. And this is also number 3 in the Love's Academic series. The first one is called The Ornithologist Field Guide to Love. Quite a mouthful there. A new book by the author of The Honey Witch, but this time a dark academia, so perhaps a little bit darker, called An Arcane Study of Stars, coming out on the 28th of April. And then a cozy murder mystery, and also on the first one. Which one is it? Number 3. There's a lot of third in a series this time. In Castle Knoll Files, and the first book in the series is called How to Solve Your Own Murder. Also on the 28th, probably extremely excitable for those who are invested in the Truly Devious series, because a new book for the Truly Devious is out. And the last one I think was in 2022, so that's quite a long time. But that sounds exciting. I've never read them, but maybe I should. Let me know. It's called The Velvet Knife. And then on the 30th, we also have another horror thriller mystery book. It's called Molka. And this is by the author who wrote The Eyes Are the Best Part. We have a standalone by T.J. Klune. It's a fantasy sci-fi novella called We Burned So Bright. And another book that has been mentioned so many times is Gothic horror historical book, which is called Japanese Gothic, which then wraps up our April. May. A gaming romance, which I wasn't aware is a genre that I'm actually quite intrigued by. This is the third in a series. The series is called Gaming and Romance. Presumably also you can read them separately though. Eighth in the Singing Hills Cycle series, which is like standalone shorter stories. And by Fonda Lee, who is the author of The Jade City. Another sci-fi, but instead of being urban, this one is a space opera and it's also a standalone, which is quite excitable for me at least. Unsurprisingly, quite often mentioned is Furybound, which is a sequel to Direbound and is the second book in the Wolves of Ruin series. It is a paranormal romantasy. It's been very popular this year. And also, even more popular, by Martha Wells, number 8 in the Murderpot series called Platform Decay. On the 7th, we have a horror fantasy called The Bone Door. It's about people trapped in a labyrinth, which is pretty cool. A sequel to Long Live Evil, which is an adult fantasy called All Hail Chaos, coming out on the 12th. Sequel to Silver Elite is coming out on the 12th as well, which is a sci-fi dystopia romance book, and it's called Broken Dove. And then something that came up a lot was the 8th book of Dungeon Crawler Carl. This is just a placeholder because it's one of the few books on the list that doesn't actually have the cover yet. And on the 14th, American Fantasy comes out, which is an interesting story set up in a cruise trip where a woman who has now been divorced lives out her teenage dream because the cruise ship is like boy band themed. On the 19th, we have a new series starting by Elsie Silver. This one is with a Western twist, and it's called Fever Dream. Book number 6 in the Dream Harbor series, which is called The Daisy Chain Flower Shop. I feel like you'll recognize this by the cover for sure. It's a contemporary romance. Also mentioned quite a few times is The Ballad of Falling Dragons, which is the sequel to When the Moon Hatched, and the series name is Moonfall. It is a romantasy with dragons. And then I'm very excited to say that the sequel to Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi gotten so much love and so much excitement in the answers made me happy because despite the fact that it is a piracy themed book, I actually adored it. And the sequel is coming out on the 21st of May, and it is kind of an adventure fantasy. And on to June, the last month. We have volume 10 of Lore Olympus coming out on the 2nd. This is a webtoon that's been traditionally published basically and is catching up with that. Also on the 2nd, by the author of the Winter Night trilogy, a new historical fantasy is coming out called The Unicorn Hunters. And something called Father Material, which is a contemporary romance book, is coming out on the 2nd as well, and also gotten quite a lot of mentions. Shadow Reaper is a YA fantasy by the author who wrote the Prison Healer series, which I know has been very well loved. On the 9th of June, we have another paranormal horror thriller, but this one sounds very intriguing. It's basically a creepy detective story. It's about an FBI, I want to say, agent who wanted to retire, but then I think gets bitten by werewolves and then like obviously shenanigans. So interesting. Another book by Shannon Maguire on the 9th, number 4 in Alchemical Journey. First book in the series is called Middle Game. This one's called In Pod Gods. It comes out on the 9th. And then also was very happy to see a lot of love for Trade of Blood. It's the third book in the Shadow of the Leviathan series, which the first book in the series is The Tainted Cup, which I also really, really liked. It's basically fantasy, but it has like a little dash of mystery and thriller elements. Still on the 9th, we have a contemporary romance thriller called Harvest Season. This is the second book in the Seasons of Carnage trilogy, and the first one was called The Taurus Season. On the 16th, we have a new Brandon Sanderson book, but this one is actually in collaboration with Peter Orolian. Sounds like it's a fantasy sci-fi. It's in an urban setting. Also on the 16th, we have a new book by Ashley Poston, who is the author of The 7-Year Slip. It's called The Someday Garden. As usual, probably will have like a magical realism element. And then last but not least, and the date here was very hard to figure out and find out. Every website pretty much says something different, so do not hold me to this. Don't hold me to any of them, but especially this one. It's a short story collection from the Six of Crows series, so of course, lots of excitement over that. Don't know anything else about it, but I feel like that's probably enough as well. And that actually completes it. It wasn't that bad, right? It wasn't that bad. I hope you found something that was interesting. Let me know if anything from here really piqued your interest and you're going to look into. Also, very much let us know if your most anticipated read was not on the slides. Share with us in the comments, and equally let us know if it was and which one was it. Just basically let us know in the comments. All right, thank you so much. I will see you soon in the next one. Bye.